West Virginia, 2004. A quiet Appalachian town, wrapped in fog and silence, carried a question that wouldn't die. What happened to Emily Grace Turner? She was 23, full of kindness, curiosity, and quiet dreams. On November 2nd, she finished her late shift at the diner off Route 60, waved goodbye to her co-workers, and drove into the cold night. It was a familiar road, the same one she'd taken home every evening. But this time she never arrived. Her car was found the next morning, parked neatly on a gravel turnout near Paint Creek. The engine was cold, her purse still on the seat, driver's door open to the wind. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away, just emptiness. Search teams combed the woods for days. Helicopters traced the ridges. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through knee-high brush. Nothing. It was as if Emily had simply disappeared into the hills she loved so much. Her parents refused to give up. They handed out flyers at gas stations, posted signs along Route 60, and kept a light burning on the porch every night. But as winter set in, hope began to fade. Detectives followed every lead, an ex-boyfriend, a drifter passing through town, even a supposed sighting in Kentucky, but none led anywhere. By early 2005, the case had gone cold. Emily's room stayed untouched, her favorite denim jacket hanging by the door, her sketchbook left open on the desk. The family marked every passing birthday in silence, waiting for a knock that never came. For years, time moved on. The town learned to live with the ache of not knowing. Detectives retired, new ones took over. Files gathered dust in the county evidence room. Then, nearly 2 decades later, technology finally caught up to the mystery. By 2022, nearly 18 years had passed since Emily Turner disappeared. The file sat untouched in the West Virginia State Police cold case archives, tucked between dozens of other unsolved disappearances. Most had long been forgotten by the public, but not by the detectives who believed that no case was truly gone, only waiting for the right moment. A new initiative to revisit old cases had been launched. Cold case units were reviewing files, evidence logs, and witness statements with modern technology in mind. When Emily's case was pulled from storage, it immediately drew attention. Among the items collected in 2004 was a small fragment of fabric from her car, once considered useless. Now, with advances in touch DNA testing, even the tiniest trace could tell a story. Detectives sent the sample to a specialized forensic lab in Charleston. Technicians swabbed it carefully, looking for even the smallest skin cells. For weeks, the evidence sat under microscopes, bathed in chemical solutions, amplified through processes that hadn't existed when Emily vanished. Then the breakthrough came, a partial DNA profile. It wasn't a direct match in the criminal database, but it was enough for genealogical investigation. Analysts built a family tree using markers from the sample, tracking connections across public ancestry databases that had grown exponentially in the last decade. Slowly, they narrowed their focus to a man who had lived in Kanawha County in 2004, someone who had been interviewed at the time, but dismissed due to lack of evidence. His name was Calvin Ray Dorsey. At the time of Emily's disappearance, Dorsey was 27, working as a local contractor, living just a few miles from where her car had been found. Neighbors remembered him as quiet, even withdrawn. He had no criminal record that would have flagged him during the original investigation. Now the DNA placed him near Emily's disappearance. Decades after the fact, investigators quietly reopened the case. They traced Dorsey's movements on November 2, 2004. Witnesses recalled seeing a truck in the Paint Creek area at the same time Emily was last seen. Security footage from gas stations, although grainy and limited, placed him near her route. Each piece built a clearer picture, and the old story began to take shape in ways it hadn't before. In January 2023, the West Virginia State Police obtained a search warrant for Dorsey's property. Surveillance was discreet. Authorities knew that after nearly 2 decades, any slip could risk losing their lead. When they entered his home, they found items that tied him directly to Emily. Personal effects she had been carrying the night she vanished, carefully hidden yet preserved in a way that would withstand modern forensic scrutiny. Meanwhile, detectives discovered a faint record overlooked in 2004, a call made from Emily's phone to an unknown number around 10:45 p.m. that night. At the time, the technology to trace it fully was limited. Now, using records preserved through the cellular network archives, they confirmed the call had reached Dorsey's line. A simple piece of digital history, ignored for years, suddenly became a cornerstone of the investigation. 2 months later, in March 2023, Dorsey was quietly arrested. He didn't resist. There was no dramatic chase, no confrontation. After nearly 19 years of living freely, he finally faced the consequences of his actions. When questioned, he initially denied involvement, but forensic evidence, DNA, recovered belongings, and call records made denial impossible. Investigators then led a search to locate Emily's remains. Guided by details Dorsey had disclosed and corroborated by historical records of the area, search teams combed a secluded ravine just a few miles from her parents' home. There, beneath years of fallen leaves and loose soil, they found her. The discovery ended years of painful uncertainty for her family, finally putting a physical truth to the long-held emotional void. Emily's parents, who had spent nearly 2 decades in quiet anguish, were present at the scene. The mix of grief and relief was almost unbearable. Her mother, Patricia, held her hands over her mouth as tears fell. Her father, Mark, stood stoic, eyes fixed on the earth where his daughter had rested, finally bringing closure to the endless years of wondering. The arrest and discovery were reported widely across West Virginia. National outlets picked up the story, the headlines emphasizing both the tragedy and the perseverance of investigators. The long silence of the town was shattered, replaced by a cautious, collective exhale. The morning of the trial felt heavy in Charleston. Nearly 19 years had passed since Emily Turner vanished, yet her name still carried a weight that filled the courthouse. Local residents, journalists, and family members packed the small courtroom. Every seat taken, every aisle lined with cameras and microphones, all eyes focused on the man who had haunted their town for nearly 2 decades, Calvin Ray Dorsey. Emily's parents, Patricia and Mark Turner, sat in the front row. Their faces were etched with years of silent grief. Patricia clutched a folded photograph of Emily in her early 20s, the one she carried everywhere, in the hope of a miracle. Mark's hands rested tightly over each other, knuckles pale from tension. Beside them sat friends who had never stopped believing she would be found. Some who had held vigils in the autumn rain, year after year, praying for answers. The prosecution opened with a clear, steady narrative. They told the story of November 2nd, 2004, Emily leaving the diner, her car found abandoned, the long years of dead ends, and the quiet heartbreak of her family. Then they laid out the breakthrough that had reopened the case. The touch DNA extracted from the car's fabric fragment, the genealogical research connecting Dorsey to Emily, and the call logs confirming his presence in her last known location. One by one, witnesses spoke. Investigators detailed the meticulous process of modern DNA extraction, explaining how the smallest skin cells, invisible in 2004, had revealed a thread that connected the past to the present. Forensic analysts described the recovered belongings, items Emily had carried the night she vanished, hidden in Dorsey's property for years. The physical evidence was undeniable, meticulous and tangible. When Emily's friends were called, they spoke quietly, but their words resonated. One childhood friend described her smile as warm enough to make the greyest day feel lighter. Another recalled Emily stopping to help strangers on the side of the road, lifting fallen groceries or giving directions without hesitation. These testimonies painted a portrait of a woman whose absence had left a hollow ache in the community, a life cut short by violence and secrecy. The defense tried to cast doubt. They questioned the reliability of DNA evidence stored for nearly 2 decades. They suggested the chain of custody might have been broken or compromised. They emphasized the passage of time, claiming memories faded, records disappeared, and witnesses might misremember details. Every effort was made to cloud the clear narrative, to create the smallest fissure of uncertainty. But the jury listened intently. They heard about the recovered items from Dorsey's property, personal effects that had once belonged to Emily, and the confession he eventually gave during questioning. He had denied involvement at first, but under pressure he admitted to forcing her into his truck and taking her life. While the details were harrowing, they matched the physical evidence, creating a narrative impossible to ignore. For Emily's family, each day in court was a struggle between relief and renewed grief. Every photograph, every testimony, every recovered item brought back the pain of the night she disappeared. Yet it also brought clarity, the long-sought truth finally revealed in painstaking detail. After 3 weeks of testimony, closing arguments began. The prosecution spoke of justice delayed but not denied. They reminded the jury that 20 years of unanswered questions and heartache had been brought to a point where the evidence could no longer be dismissed. They asked simply for acknowledgement of the truth and accountability for a life stolen too soon. The jury deliberated for 4 days. In the quiet corridors of the courthouse, the tension was palpable. Residents, reporters, and family waited anxiously, the air thick with expectation. Finally, on the morning of June 14, 2024, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Gasps filled the room. Patricia dropped to her knees, clutching the photograph of her daughter. Mark placed his hands over his face, trying to steady himself. Relief and sorrow collided in the courtroom, a mixture of justice finally served, and grief that would never fully leave. Dorsey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was final, but the impact extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The small Appalachian town that had carried Emily's story for almost 2 decades finally felt a measure of closure. Her family, friends, and neighbors could, at last, begin the slow process of healing. Even as the courtroom emptied, questions lingered in the community. Why had it taken nearly 2 decades to solve the case? How had a man so close to Emily's home remained free for so long? The answers were complex. Limited forensic technology in 2004, overlooked evidence, and a lack of nationwide databases capable of linking him to the crime. Yet the story also served as a testament to perseverance, to the unrelenting belief of family members, investigators, and advocates who refused to let Emily Turner's name be forgotten. Outside the courthouse, candles were lit. People gathered quietly, some leaving flowers at the memorial bench in the town square, a place dedicated to Emily's memory long before her case was solved. The vigil was different now. No longer a plea for answers, but a tribute to a life remembered, a young woman whose spirit had inspired a town to never give up hope. In the weeks following Calvin Dorsey's conviction, the small town of Charleston and the surrounding Kanawha County slowly began to exhale. The trial had reopened wounds that had never fully healed, but it had also brought answers, a sense of closure that had eluded Emily Turner's family for nearly 2 decades. Yet for Patricia and Mark Turner, life remained bittersweet. No verdict could restore the years lost or the moments they would never share with their daughter. The media coverage highlighted the perseverance of investigators and the power of modern forensic science. Articles, interviews, and television segments praised the use of touch DNA and genealogical analysis, demonstrating how cases once considered hopeless could be solved with patience and innovation. Emily's story became part of a broader national conversation about cold cases, evidence preservation, and the need for specialized investigative units. Her parents, still grappling with grief, decided to take action. They wanted Emily's legacy to be one of hope, advocacy, and awareness. In July 2024, They worked with local law enforcement and non-profit organizations to establish the Emily Turner Memorial Fund, aimed at supporting families of missing persons and funding forensic advancements in West Virginia. The announcement drew attention statewide, inspiring donations from journalists, law enforcement officers, and private citizens who had followed Emily's case for years. In Elmhurst, where Emily had spent part of her youth visiting relatives, a small memorial bench was installed near the community center, inscribed with her name and the simple phrase, "She is not forgotten." On weekends, children who had grown up hearing the story would visit, leaving flowers or small tokens of remembrance. Friends of Emily, and even some of the journalists who had covered her story over the years, would gather quietly, sharing memories and photographs, keeping her presence alive in the community's consciousness. One of the most remarkable outcomes was the renewed attention to cold cases across West Virginia. Inspired by the Turner investigation, the state legislature approved increased funding for cold case units, modernizing laboratories, and training programs for law enforcement. Public awareness campaigns emphasized the importance of reporting suspicious activity and preserving evidence, no matter how old the case. Emily's story, while tragic, became a blueprint for change. Meanwhile, the recovered items from Dorsey's property, personal effects, photographs, and other belongings of Emily were carefully catalogued and returned to her family. Patricia displayed them in a small private space in their home, a shrine to the daughter they had lost and found again in memory. Each item carried stories, fragments of the life that had been interrupted, and pieces of her spirit preserved against the passage of time. Emily's story also inspired the next generation of investigative journalists. Local colleges and high schools began incorporating her case into courses on ethics, investigative reporting, and forensic science. Professors highlighted her life not just as a story of victimhood, but as a testament to the resilience of families and the tireless work of professionals committed to justice. Students studied her case files, the timeline of her disappearance, and the way touch DNA technology finally brought the truth to light. In the larger community, conversations shifted from sorrow to reflection. Town hall meetings discussed the challenges of long unsolved cases, emphasizing collaboration between law enforcement, forensic labs, and families. Residents shared their own experiences, sometimes recalling small details they had forgotten, now recognizing their importance in the broader investigation. The legacy of Emily Turner became a reminder that no detail was too small, no observation insignificant. Patricia Turner in interviews often spoke with quiet grace. Emily's life mattered, she would say. Her story shows that even when the world seems silent, perseverance, patience, and the courage to seek the truth can make a difference. Mark Turner added, "Justice doesn't erase the pain, but it can bring clarity. It can remind us that people are paying attention, even when we feel forgotten." The story of Emily Turner also emphasized the ethical and emotional aspects of forensic genealogy. Discussions in professional forums examined the balance between privacy and justice, how public ancestry databases could help solve crimes, and the importance of storing evidence properly to withstand years, even decades of time. Emily's case became a reference point in training programs for law enforcement nationwide. Community groups organized photo exhibits and storytelling sessions highlighting Emily's life before her disappearance. Her friends contributed photographs, letters, and essays, painting a portrait of a woman who had loved fiercely, laughed often, and made a lasting impression on everyone she met. The exhibits were both a celebration of her life and a somber reminder of the tragedy that had cut it short. By late 2024, the Turner family felt a sense of responsibility to transform grief into advocacy. They worked with local legislators to implement programs supporting missing persons cases, emphasizing early reporting, evidence preservation, and public engagement. Emily's name became associated with vigilance, compassion, and the importance of never allowing a disappearance to fade from memory. As the anniversary of her disappearance approached, Patricia and Mark organized a memorial walk through the town of Charleston. Friends, neighbors, and supporters gathered, walking in silence along the route Emily had last traveled. The event was not only a tribute, but also a public reminder that the fight for justice could span decades, that no case was truly closed until it was solved. In homes, schools, and workplaces, people spoke of Emily with reverence. Her story transcended tragedy, serving as a lesson in patience, innovation, and the enduring strength of love. Local newspapers published retrospectives, detailing the journey from her disappearance to the conviction of Dorsey, highlighting the evolution of forensic science over nearly 20 years. Through all this, the Turners maintained a quiet dignity. They continued to honor Emily's memory, not through anger but through action. Scholarships were established in her name for students pursuing criminal justice, forensic science, and advocacy for victims' families. Each scholarship recipient learned about Emily, ensuring her story remained a source of inspiration, a catalyst for positive change. In the community, the impact of her case was tangible. Police officers were more vigilant, evidence rooms were upgraded, and cold case units received additional funding. Families of other missing persons found renewed hope, seeing Emily's story as proof that persistence and modern technology could finally bring answers. Even after decades of silence, the memory of Emily Turner was also preserved digitally. Documentaries, podcasts, and articles chronicled her life and the painstaking investigation that had eventually brought closure. Each retelling emphasized not just the crime, but her humanity, the love she had given, and the resilience of the people who refused to forget her. As 2025 unfolded, the story of Emily Turner had settled into the fabric of Charleston and Kanawha County. While the grief of losing her never fully vanished for her family, the case had become a beacon of what could be achieved through perseverance, science, and unwavering dedication. In classrooms, newsrooms, and community centers, Emily's story, the Emily Turner Memorial Fund, had grown steadily, providing financial assistance to families still seeking answers for missing loved ones. Through grants, workshops, and public awareness campaigns, the fund empowered citizens to report suspicious activity and reinforced the importance of meticulous record-keeping in law enforcement. Families of other cold case victims saw a glimmer of hope. Realizing that time did not always mean the end of a search, Patricia and Mark Turner had become quiet pillars in the community, attending memorials, meeting with legislators, and speaking at public forums. Each engagement carried the weight of lived experience, yet they spoke with a measured calm, focusing on solutions rather than the grief that had so long defined them. Emily's story isn't just about tragedy, Patricia would say. It's about hope, about persistence, and about the power of never giving up, even when the world seems silent. Emily's friends and former colleagues organized projects to preserve her memory, including the completion of her personal journal entries, essays, and unpublished photographs. These materials were donated to the Charleston Public Library, forming a permanent archive titled The Emily Turner Collection. Students, historians, and journalists now had access to a first-hand account of her perspective, providing insight into her compassion, curiosity, and commitment to truth. In schools, teachers used Emily's story as a way to engage students in discussions about civic responsibility, forensic science, and journalism ethics. Young people learned about the evolution of DNA technology, genealogical methods, and the painstaking investigative work required to solve a cold case. Emily's life became a case study in the value of patience, persistence, and the integrity of documenting evidence, lessons that extended far beyond the classroom. The community continued to honor Emily in quieter, more personal ways. Each year on June 14th, the anniversary of her discovery, locals would leave flowers, candles, and notes along the route where she had last been seen. In Crescent Park, near D. The memorial bench, native wildflowers blossomed, tended by volunteers and neighbors, a living tribute to her love of nature and the quiet beauty she always sought to capture in her own life. For law enforcement, Emily's case became an exemplar of how older evidence could be preserved and later re-examined with modern methods. Officers who had worked on her case decades ago now shared their experiences with new recruits, highlighting both the limitations and the breakthroughs in forensic investigation. The case also prompted agencies statewide to review storage procedures, ensuring that crucial items, clothing, DNA samples, personal belongings, could withstand the passage of years without compromising their value. Emily's story reverberated beyond West Virginia. Cold case units across the country cited her case when advocating for funding and legislative support. Investigators referenced the meticulous work done on her evidence and the eventual breakthrough through genealogical DNA analysis as proof that patience, diligence, and technological advancement could yield justice even after decades. In the media, Emily's story continued to inspire. Documentaries and podcasts explored not only her disappearance and murder, but also the broader implications for missing persons cases nationwide. Journalists highlighted the emotional toll on families, the challenges of investigative work, and the advancements in forensic science that had made solving such cold cases possible. Each retelling ensured that Emily's life and her story remained vivid, remembered, and honored. For Patricia and Mark Turner, the months and years following the conviction of Calvin Dorsey were filled with both relief and sorrow. Relief that justice had finally been served, sorrow for the years lost, and determination to ensure that Emily's memory continued to serve a purpose. They attended conferences, met with other families of victims, and worked tirelessly to advocate for the improvements that could prevent future tragedies. Their efforts became a model for grief, transformed into action. Loss transformed into advocacy. Emily's friends also played a critical role in keeping her legacy alive. Leah, her closest childhood friend, organized photo exhibitions and community storytelling events, allowing people to connect with Emily's life beyond the tragedy. Through these events, they celebrated her curiosity, her laughter, her empathy, and her passion for the world around her. People remembered her not just as a victim, but as a person who had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a lasting impression on everyone she met. In Charleston, the City Council approved the creation of an annual Emily Turner Day, a day devoted to remembrance, community engagement, and advocacy for missing persons. Schools, community groups, and non-profit organizations used the day to hold workshops, volunteer events, and discussions about the importance of community vigilance, empathy, and collective responsibility. Emily's life and story had become a catalyst for broader social awareness. The Turner family's advocacy work also extended into mental health support. Recognizing the profound trauma associated with missing persons and violent crime, the Emily Turner Memorial Fund partnered with local mental health organizations to provide counseling and resources to families enduring similar crises. This work ensured that Emily's legacy encompassed not only justice but compassion, support, and healing for those still struggling. Meanwhile, in the realm of forensic science, Emily's case remained a touchstone. Law enforcement agencies used her investigation as a training tool, demonstrating how evidence preserved decades